Today we're looking at the development of Beyonce's belting. That. And it gets better. And it gets better. And it gets better. The difference in the tone quality is remarkable. It's remarkable. That's 5 years. What we were just shown was a span of 5 or 6 years. It sounds simple. It sounds like a simple thing to get right, but it's not. The way it works mechanically is why it's so much more reliable than other means of hitting high notes. The way that the vocal folds work when you belt. These right here, these are the vocal folds, okay? What happens is that there are two prevailing theories. We're going to go with just one of them, and that's the thyroid cartilage tilts backwards. If you look, the vocal folds are actually connected to the larynx. This thing right here, your Adam's apple, that's your thyroid cartilage. And the folds are connected to that. The idea is that when the thyroid cartilage tilts back, what you're getting are thicker folds. They're fatter, they're together. That creates a level of reliability. When you sing in a more classical manner, the opposite happens. This thyroid cartilage tilts forward, and that creates a sound that we're familiar with. It's called vibrato. That is how vibrato happens. That is how it works. I'm trying to look for a thing that stretches. There we go. You do that, there's this fight between the muscles and the stretching, and you get this kind of trembling thing that's vibrato. Those muscles are the cricothyroid muscles that are what cause that phenomena to happen. The existence of those muscles create some of the unreliable elements that we associate with other forms of singing. The problem with belting is that while it's remarkably consistent, it's also remarkably dangerous if you do not know what you're doing. So, I'm going to go over what Beyonce does, and then I'm going to provide you with guardrails, okay, so that you don't mess up your voice, and you can practice belting. But, you know, definitely keep those safety rails on, all right? When I give them to you, just keep them going, and don't practice for too long on these very, very difficult things. You know, even when Beyonce was younger, the belts developed. Let's jump into that. So when it comes to head voice versus chest voice versus belt, let's be very clear. Let me explain some of how this works. When we look at the vocal folds, we usually look at them top and down, right? We are overhead, and that's how you would look at them via a scope. So that's the view we're used to. That view is very useful when we're discussing chest voice and head voice, and the general ways that those things apply. So this is the top-down view of the vocal folds. As we go through different registers, and I'm doing the little quotes here because registers are not a useful or a useless concept, but they don't, they're not elegant. It's a shorthand. The way we want to think of the voice is on a continuum, because that's almost how everything operates here. When does it become head voice? When does it become chest voice? When does it become falsetto? We need to understand how much the folds connect in various parts of the different registers. What is the thing that changes on the continuum? So when we look at the vocal folds, and they're fully adducted, meaning these things right here, these vocal folds right here, they come together completely and entirely. Rytenoids bring them all together, and they are, whoops, the wrong thing. They're connected to the thyroid cartilage, okay? So that is going to be the first point of contact. Thyroid cartilage doesn't move. That's the first point of contact. That's where they're going to touch each other quickly and consensually. When it's quote-unquote chest, right, we're going to get this line right here, and the folds are going to come together. This does change over time. At a certain point, you want the folds to be smaller, and you want them to be smaller because when your pitches, the waveforms that you're trying to create when you create sound, you go higher. The way that it works is that a pitch has a faster oscillation. Waveforms are literally smaller. And this is a very crass explanation, but because the waveforms are smaller, faster whatever is making the sound, it needs to change. Let's actually just do that with like a card, right? If I do this, you can hear kind of the lower frequencies, right? That obnoxious air sound you're hearing. Now let's go fast. Right? So that speed makes all the difference in the world, but you only get speed when things are lighter and smaller, right? At least that's how it works with the vocal folds. Sorry if I made your ears bleed. So that's what we have here. We have a tool where we can adjust how much connection there is. At what point this happens is mostly arbitrary because, again, it's on a continuum, right? At any point, this connection can sever is a bit of an extreme graphic word, but you can quote unquote disconnect, right? So head voice has some of the part of the folds not connected. And so we usually at that point start to hear air. And by the way, this is not belting. We're not talking about belting right now. We're talking about what you would call traditional singing, although that is also a problematic definition as well. But regardless, this is how going up works if you're singing classically, I guess, is the best way to put it. So the difference between chest and head, we can actually measure using a spectrogram. So this is how you know that there is some separation in the folds. So this sizzly stuff right here, this kind of white noise thing, that's actually breath leaking. To a certain degree, that's inevitable. You can't stop air from leaking as you go up, kind of. Huge asterisks there, and that's where the meat is, and we're going to get into that. But that's what we're looking at here, is we're looking at a more traditional view. So where does it turn into falsetto? If head voice is, okay, some of the folds are not together, where does falsetto begin? And this is the argument that drives people crazy. And there's no level of academia where it's like, oh yeah, no, like, we call it the F word. Everybody fights over it, everybody. But I hope that this explanation will actually help you understand to what degree should we be fighting over this? Here we go. Check this out. As we progress and the folds separate more and more and more, right? We were there, now maybe we're here. Maybe this is the only thing that's connecting. Is that falsetto? What about here? Maybe it's this at this point, right? Is that falsetto? You can't really quantify what falsetto is because it's based on this continuum, and at certain points really it degenerates into an argument about aesthetics. We all have a way that we identify falsetto to our ears because there is eventually going to be full open, and I think most people would just at this point just acknowledge that it's falsetto, but there's that massive in between. Let's go back to the spectrogram, and we're just gonna boom, we're just gonna see it, we're gonna hear it, we're gonna see it. And this will end every terrible discussion about falsetto that will ever happen on the internet. We'll have world peace. I'll be able to sleep at night. Or maybe you'll, hopefully post less in the YouTube comments. You got to think of your health. You can't keep doing that to yourself. Bella figlia dell'amore. Right? When I go up, you can see a little bit of those airy bits, right? A little bit. And then I'm going to go up higher. O mondeton sol, tua le mia bene consolar. You'll notice that there is not a little, it's there. There's some little static things, but it's not really that much. That's called training. Very, very, very difficult to learn to do that. Because on one hand, you need extremely strong cricothyroid muscles, and so it just takes time. But also, you have to have tremendous efficiencies in your posture, the amount of breath you take in and take out. It takes training. Belting is so different. Let's get into why. It's both miraculous and terrifying. So we're going to change our perspective here. We're top down. We're actually going to change our perspective to right here. Look at it in this plane as soon as we eliminate the ligaments. Love my ligaments. Everybody, my ligaments in the house. Raise up your hand. I don't know, this is a bad joke that needs to stop right now. So two things happen, right? These are the vocal folds, and they go when the fibrocartilage tilts for more classical sounds, we get this happening. They stretch out, so they both thin out and they're more taut, so they do vibrate faster, and they can hold together. They can become a little more together as you tilt more and as you sing more efficiently, and that allows you to have a fuller sound with less air escaping. Belting is different. Belting is hard. Probably the most difficult thing to do in singing, at least doing it well, unless you were raised around it. These suckers, when you belt, do this. This is your thyroid cartilage tilt for more classical sound. That's belting. The folds come together. And that's where we need to understand thickness. We hear it, we talk about it, but we never see it. When we belt, it's not just that the folds come together, it's that all of this in between, all of it also meet. That's something we don't talk about when we talk about a top-down view. It's very difficult to appreciate and understand that vocal quote-unquote weight is the amount that the vertical axis is touching. Always think about the horizontal. I guess it depends how you invert these axes, but the point is we usually look at it from top down. We don't think about the amount of contact that we have in here, or at least we think of them separately. When you belt, not only is the distance shorter, you have a shorter distance from here to here, right? They go in like this, from the tilting. Then you also have this. All of this connects, all of it. This as much as you can manage. So this creates some really nice context. We're going to go back to this example, right? Ideally, when a belt is done well, there's not going to be a lot of air leakage, right? If they're together. Oh boy. In order to achieve that, you can do it a lot of different ways, but what you don't want to do is you do not, for the love of God, you just do not want to force it. So here's how we're going to put out the guardrails, and here's what's going to allow us to practice the bits that Beyonce is practicing. And, well, not practicing, she's doing. I'm sure she also practices, but we're not going to listen to a practice session. We're listening to the woman belt her face off. Here are those guardrails. Right, first things first, I'm going to jump up and down a little bit, okay? Standing is better. Why does this matter? Why are we doing this weird nonsense? In order to belt in such a way where the folds don't split open, we're actually going to need less air. Not to be confused with less support, quote unquote. Less air. Less air needs to exit our face hole. But the way that we're going to do that is by expanding the torso, getting it moving, getting this cardiovascular exercises going so that the rib cage is supple and expands. People call this appoggio. I think it's stupid to call it appoggio. I think that's pretentious Italianate nonsense. Here we are. The intercostal muscles contract, and that brings the rib cage outwards. This is the diaphragm. As it contracts, you'll see that the rib cage expands. So this is important for a couple of reasons. You cannot feel your diaphragm. It has no nerve endings. The idea of diaphragmatic breathing is a farce. If you don't use your diaphragm to breathe, it's because you are dead. So we have to think and focus on things we can control and feel. The intercostal muscles are really good, but I want to expand your attention to the entire torso. So that's the whole body. The whole body is affecting the torso. If you do this, there's a contraction on one side and expansion on the other, vice versa, all of that. We want it as expanded as humanly possible in order to keep our belt super, super safe. Here's the trap though. If I expand my rib cage as much as I can, I'm going to be taking in more air. And that's bad, at least for this. So if we take in a big breath, we'll feel everything expand. Oh boy, that feels nice and good. Now we need to exhale everything. Okay, here's guardrail number one. I'm gonna exhale everything, quote unquote. Exhale, y'all. Look at that. I got video editing, kind of. Y'all are gonna exhale all of what you got, okay? And that's gonna keep this from happening. Check this out. The first thing you got is the exhale. Next thing, and this is gonna piss people off, but we're just using it in order to get somewhere, okay? This is not the final result. We're gonna do something very naughty. We're gonna nasalize our vowels for a good reason. When the soft palate goes down, what's happening is that you're allowing air to go through your nostrils. So when I say nasalize the vowels, I'm actually saying open up your soft palate. It's like a release valve. It's so much easier to sing nasally, and as we get comfortable on a note, we can then grow into the note by lifting our soft palate over time. That's how we're going to practice belting, is we're going to get up there, and we're going to try to stay there for a reasonable amount of time, not for too long and not too short. We're going to get up to something that feels comfortable and achievable. We're not going to go for B. We're not going to go for notes that we can't hit. We have to go on a note that we can hit, but it's not quite perfect, and then we work on it from there. So let me get into that one. So we're gonna get into this, and we're gonna take a note actually from Beyonce. That's how we're gonna start. And that's why I love. So that's actually not a belt, and it's actually going a little flat. And here's why. And by the way, when I say someone goes flat, I am saying that people are human and not perfect. Y'all, I can't even begin to tell you how exhausting a tour is. No one's going to be a perfect voice all the time, always. But let's just call it what it is. It's a flat note, but we can talk about it and still recognize the fact that Beyonce is an incredible singer. Incredible. And anyone who says otherwise is objectively wrong. But this is flat, and we're going to talk about why. And we're going to also talk about why why it's not a belt. Because this is a trick that a lot of people don't see or hear. So this is not a belt. What this is she is doing a thyroid cartilage tilt and then holding it with tension, which is why it goes flat. And the pitch is wavering. And when we're talking flat, we're talking like 1 cent, which is like a 100th of a pitch. It's not that flat. Actually, probably most people wouldn't hear it. You can certainly hear the transition into nasality. This is the fake belt. It is done often, and we need to identify what that is. A fake belt is the thyroid cartilage tilt where things are stretched out, and you stop the vibrato by creating tension. The result is the vowel gets a little nasalized. So what she's doing is this. Ah! It's a little flat. The nasal passages are open by default. It's not a belt. This is a belt. Ah! That's a belt. Now here's how we measure the quality of that belt. Let's look at how much air leaked. You can get a spectrogram online, by the way. You just need to look up a spectrogram, and there's some free ones. Some are convoluted, some are simple. Here's how we know that that's not a good belt. Here's how we know. This air leaking, the folds are supposed to be, boom, together, right? So why is there air leaking? Now, to a degree, right, that they have to oscillate. They don't just like hold together, they move, right? So certain amounts of air are definitely leaking. But that hiss sound that you were hearing, that's from air escaping. Quality of the note is not static to it. It kind of changes, obviously. Here it's at its worst, like right above there. This is why belting is tricky. You can think to yourself, I have a good belt here. Or you can try to fake the belt. At the end of the day, there is a very easy way to determine when it's a belt and when it's a good belt. So, that said, let's take a look at Beyonce's second note here, which is choice. Choice? Choice. There we go. I swear I know how to internet. That. And it gets better. And it gets better. And it gets better. The difference in the tone quality is remarkable. It's remarkable. That's 5 years. What we were just shown was a span of 5 or 6 years. It sounds simple. It sounds like a simple thing to get right, but it's not. I'll have to remember that the vocal folds for women, estrogen-laden folds is the politically correct term. We have to remember that estrogen-laden folds are about the size of a dime. So we're talking about all of this different control, all of this stuff, and really we're just talking about this little piece here, this little thing that can get completely overpowered by the rest of your body. Singing is astonishing. It's amazing. It's incredible we can even do it. And when we look at someone like Beyonce, over just this 5-year period of time, it's such a difference in mastery. It sounds so simple. It sounds so just like I'm telling you this, like, oh, that's how it works. But doing it, holy crap. And that's why this woman is a legend, because this is 10 years ago. This is what she sounded like 10 years ago. You bet your ass she sounds better now. That freedom. Usually as a singer gets more experience, there's this evenness of bright and dark tone qualities. A belt is particularly hard to get into a place where it's kind of lush. This is a part of her range for Beyonce and people who have voices like her, where it's a transition. Very difficult. It's hard to get like a good meaty belt at this sort of weird breaking point. So what we see is instead of her putting more power behind it, what we're hearing is more resonance. Not the same thing. We can control resonance by shaping our vowels, our vocal tract. That creates resonance. So she is doing this. I'm not a belter per se. I'm practicing it. Like I said, there's a difference between knowing and doing. So I'm going to use these safeguards that if you don't feel comfortable belting, please, for the love of God, at least start practicing. While you're warming up, use the safeguards that we talked about. Nasality and exhaling everything, okay? Protect yourself. You don't need to injure yourself to get good at belting. Do it smart, do it right. Have patience. We can experiment with resonance by just kind of morphing the vowels a little bit. I'm going to go into a part of my range that's kind of a break. And that way we can kind of replicate the awkwardness that happens when you kind of have to move from more of your mid and lower range into this where you start to kind of go up and belt. Ah! Hear that stiffness? There's a stiffness and there's a lack of brightness. When we get more comfortable, we'll see this, and this is why people say opening up the voice. You'll hear it. As a singer gets better and better and better, there's this freedom that happens to where this tension goes away, and you start to get this kind of bright little gem sort of thing going on, where it's like almost crystal. It's a tone quality that we hear in this from Beyonce, and it's really, really an attractive sound, I think. I'm a big fan of this. Pretty darn good, isn't it? And what you hear is this lushness, too. He's got the right balance. Again, this is very hard to do in this weird transition point. Motown Live can't feel you. Immediately when we jump to the B, immediately, it's easier and it's more compelling. Listen again for this change. Listen again for it. It's a phenomenal change. We're going to hear it over time. I love this video. Thank you for whoever put this together. I'll put the little at thing. This is not my compilation. Someone else did it, and they're going to be on the screen right now. Check them out. This is a great compilation. Yeah, some of these are not belts. That's definitely a belt. So the C for women is generally where we start seeing the belt really shine. And this is more where you're going to find people being a lot more comfortable belting in this range right here. Now I want to be very clear, because I said that vibrato denotes tilting that is not necessarily belting. That's not true. You can do both at the same time. Nice. That. Listen, okay, this woman's been singing her entire life. Her entire life. Listen to the improvement. I have chills. I'm like, it's so fantastic and inspiring. It's so easy. It's so clean. It's still got the weight to it, right? It's still got the weight that we usually associate with a belt. Man, that's an attractive sound. She doesn't start from a bad place. Like when we're 10 years ago, we're in 1999, she's not a bad singer at all. She's still a fantastic singer, but the thing that makes Beyonce amazing is she is relentless. You bet your bunions, which is a term I haven't heard in a long time, but we're bringing it back for this video. You bet your bunions She's every day, every single day, few days off here and there because she's a sane human being, but every day that she is up for it, she's working on her body because her performances are remarkably physical. She is in amazing top-tier shape, and that also reflects... One thing that's really interesting about belting is that a fundamental quality of it is the contraction of the areoepiglottic sphincter. Okay, so this is not the best. There's two of these. Just imagine there's one on the other side. This right here, atop of the false fold, which are top of the vocal folds, right? We have an areoepiglottic muscle. There's two on each, or there's one on each side, so there's two of them. When they contract, they create a sphincter, the areoepiglottic sphincter. What this does is it does two things. It creates this sort of Fran Fine sound, because that's actually what Fran Drescher does. She is, oh my God, Mr. Chef. It sounds nasally, but it's not. It adds a brighter quality. It allows high notes to be easier, and it raises the larynx a little bit. A fundamental quality of a belt is the contraction of the areoepiglottic sphincter. Happens in opera too. It's a great way to project, but the frequency range that it covers can be obnoxious. I want to show you this. So what you'll see here is around 2.5 kHz, and this is the case with tenors. Obviously, it changes on your voice type, but sopranos do, when they contract the areoepiglottic sphincter, do have the tendency to hit a range of frequencies that are obnoxious to the ear. I want you to listen to this real quick. I wanna be the very best that no one ever was. We're going to ignore the fact that that last note is actually terrible. Look at all of the highlighting of these frequencies right around that area. This is what the contraction of the areoepiglottic sphincter does. This matters because it's inherently an obnoxious sound, which is why when someone sounds pretty when they belt, it's like mind-boggling. Because what they're doing is they're balancing the resonance. When you contract the areoepiglottic sphincter, those obnoxious frequencies are highlighted. So it takes a level of mastery to compensate for that and bring in a level of warmth, because you have to do that very easily and with you can't have a lot of tension, right? Belting is already really difficult. You can't manipulate stuff. You have to have a comfort, and then you have to have a flexibility and familiarity with the note that is so profound that you can change the quality of that sound, even though those frequencies are highlighted and naturally amplified. So when I say that Beyonce is a pretty belt, or when people say that Whitney Houston's belt they're so lush, that's hard-earned in a way that's really hard to communicate. Very difficult. Now I'm going to actually make the Pokemon theme song where I don't mess it up, because that's my childhood, and I'm murdering my childhood. Now, one thing you can do to get rid of those obnoxious frequencies and cheat a little bit is you can use an EQ, an equalizer, to isolate those frequencies and bring them down. Now, we're going to ignore the terrible harmonies around it, but take a look at this, and this is what an EQ does. It's like a nice little trick, a nice little hack here. I want to be the very best that no one ever was. Sounds so much different, doesn't it? There's a reason for that. If you look at this is more idiomatic of a belt where everything is kind of evenly stacked. The intensity. So the way a spectrogram works is that the brightness of the frequency denotes the volume. You can see this is how a proper belt should ideally look like, where everything is kind of almost on equal levels. It's incredible. It's a wall of sound. Belting is incredible. There are levels to this shit. You'll see that because I used an EQ, it sounds better. And I just removed the EQ from my speaking voice, but it sounds better and it looks better on as far as what qualities we want to see in a belt. So if you're impatient, you don't want to practice for 10 years and then another 10 years so that your belts are as good as Beyonce. This is a quick little superficial hack that you can use. So I want you to hear this correction here. This is like flat happens. It just does. Like people get flat because they're not perfect human being robots. But a good singer fixes it. I love this quote from Heifetz. They asked, how are you never flat? He's like, oh, I'm flat. I just fix it as I go. Heifetz being probably one of the greatest violin players of all time. He's incredible. And that's the thing. He's like, I just slide and I fix it. And listen to Beyonce doing that. This is He's like, ah, that's not quite perfect. I'm going to make this adjustment right here. Like, it's incredible. You can tell that she's like, okay, let me lighten this up. I love this bit. So she starts, as she hits the note, this is a whole process. It's great. It's fantastic. She's hitting that note. She's about to go on it. She's like, oh, that's not going to work. Right? The body changes every day. And need to remind you, the instrument for this woman is about the size of a dime, okay? So the level of attention and ability is already phenomenal at this point in her career. She's going to slide up and be like, oh, that's not going to work. So she quiets it down. And then she starts playing with the vowel. She finds the comfort. She's like, okay, this is not working out. I'm going to go quiet. I'm going to grow into it. And then I'm going to mess with the vowel until it sounds good. And this all happened in like half a second. Now listen to the richness of this one.